Good evening and welcome to the Aspen Institute. I'm Crystal Logan, Vice President of Aspen Community Programs and Engagement, and I'm really thrilled to welcome you all to this evening's Murdoch Mind, Body, Spirit series program. Special thanks to Gina and Jerry Murdoch for sponsoring this series. Thanks to our Society of Fellows members whose support also helps us put on these talks, and thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. We are thrilled to have our friend Soledad Hurst moderating this discussion. She is active in many local organizations, and she and her husband Bob have made significant investments in many important causes in the region. And we are very honored to have Dr. Mark Hyman back with us to share his research with us. He is a senior advisor for the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine, and he's the founder of the UltraWellness Center. His new book, Young Forever, is on sale out in the lobby. Afterward, he will be signing books. His cookbook is also available. It's called Young Forever, The Secrets to Living Your Longest, Healthiest Life. So we're really, really looking forward to this conversation. Thanks to you both for being here, and the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. So, welcome everybody. Welcome in joining Dr. Hyman and myself in talking about health and longevity. I know there's a lot of really interesting things to do in Aspen, so we're really glad that you decided to share an hour with us tonight. You've written over 20 books, and tonight we're going to be concentrating on your newest, which is Young Forever. And I just want to start with maybe my favorite line in the whole book on page 167.
Oh, wow.
Where you say, I plan to live until 120, maybe even 180. Yes. And I am like a super fan of like optimism and aspiration and everything. But all joking aside, you really do lay out some very, very interesting things in the book, some of which are kind of obvious to an Aspen audience of healthy eating and exercise and community and sleep, but also some more innovative things. And I wanted to dive in first with two things that really struck me early on in the book. The first was this idea of aging as a treatable disease, so referring to aging as disease. And the second is the concept that our biological age can either accelerate or reverse at any point based on the inputs into biology. So I want to start with both of those.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me, everybody. It's great to be here in Aspen. It's beautiful. I love it here, and I'm really honored to be able to speak here with you all. I say you all because I just moved to Austin, Texas. I think I'm supposed to say that. I don't know. Yeah, so the concept of aging as a disease is sort of new. The World Health Organization has recognized that. The current U.S. coding system has not. But what we see around us is typically abnormal aging. My favorite Instagram kind of crush is on this guy, Alain Gustave, who's 79 years old and is ripped. And he can like rip out 30 pull-ups and do all this stuff that I can't even do. I'm working at it. But it's an idea that is relatively new, which is that the fundamental things that go wrong as we get older are not inevitable. The breakdown in our bodies, the decline in function, the disability, the diseases, they're not things that are normal. They're abnormal processes that can be treated just like any other condition that you have. So we have this idea of health span and lifespan. Health span is essentially how many years you're healthy. Your lifespan is how many years you're alive. They should be the same. You basically kind of want to go along like this and then just kind of drop off the cliff, right? You don't want to have this long, slow, painful, expensive death, which is what many people experience. In fact, the majority of Americans experience that. And the last 20% of people's lives is usually spent in poor health. And so the fundamental diseases of aging have root causes. Unfortunately, medicine is not focused on root causes. And what I've done for 30 years is practice root cause medicine, systems medicine, network medicine, functional medicine, it doesn't matter what you call it. It's understanding the body as one integrated network. And it's a network of networks. So it's a biological network of networks. And those all have to be functioning and optimally running in order for you to be healthy. And what's really exciting is that, the whole field of longevity and aging is relatively new in terms of research. And it's because there's a bunch of billionaires out there who decided they don't want to die young and have invested billions of dollars into longevity research. And that's been so exciting because now we have a lot of data. And one of the fundamental things that's been uncovered is this idea of the hallmarks of aging. What are the fundamental things that go wrong that we can modify or treat and reverse our biological age? I was born in 1959. I'm going to be 65 this year. There ain't a thing I can do about that. But biologically, there is a lot I can do. And so there's a lot of scientists looking at these fundamental things that you might have heard about, whether it's inflammation and aging, or the microbiome, or zombie cells, or telomeres, or your epigenome, or damaged proteins that we hear about in longevity, or DNA damage. There are all these things that happen, mitochondrial dysfunction, energy issues, what we call deregulated nutrient sensing, which is how our bodies regulate many of these pathways through what we'll talk about later, which is called the longevity switches. And so we now are starting to understand these mechanisms, and it's so much more important to focus on these underlying systems that go wrong than the diseases that they cause. So heart disease, diabetes, dementia, and cancer are the kind of four horsemen of the apocalypse of aging. And these are all things that are caused by something, and that those root causes are now understood. But unfortunately, it's not in medical care yet. There are practices like mine and others around the country where people are doing this innovative work. But most medicine and most medical schools are not teaching this. But what happens is you can actually reverse this process. So about 2 years ago when I was writing this book, I actually decided to do a biological age test. It's called DNA methylation. Now, DNA methylation essentially is measuring the way in which your genes are controlled. You can't change your genes, they're fixed. They're like 88 keys on a piano. But you can change which genes get turned on or off and regulated. You can turn on longevity genes or disease genes, inflammation genes or anti-inflammatory genes, and so on. And this is called the epigenome. It's above the genes. It's sort of the regulator of the genes. It's like the piano player. Just like you can play on a piano, you can play jazz or classical or ragtime or rock or folk music. You can play an infinite number of tunes on your genes. And the song of life is essentially determined by all the things that you do every single day that you can modify. And it's not like you have to do crazy stuff to get 80% of the way there. So I decided I was going to go on an adventure for the next 2 years and do a bunch of stuff to see if I could reverse my biological age. And I did, dietary things, exercise things, community-based things, stress reduction, all the normal stuff, right? But I also did a lot of other kind of wild and wacky stuff like plasmapheresis and exosomes and peptides and ozone and
we'll get into
stem cells and something called the PK protocol. And I did all this stuff, hyperbarics. And I redid my biological age a couple months ago when I'm 64. And when I was 62, my biological age was 43. But I got 2 years chronologically older, but now I got 4 years biologically younger. So now I'm 39.
So so now he's 39. I'm 21. So can we talk a little bit about how you did that?
Yeah.
You threw out a bunch of stuff in there, and again, the idea of reversing that. You mentioned longevity switches.
Yeah.
And when we were talking back in the green room, you talked about there are sort of four main ones.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, for sure.
You said these were some sort of practical take-homes for people.
Yeah, I want to get into that, and I just want to finish one last thought on the last piece, which is that, if we cured cancer and heart disease from the face of the planet, the number 1 and 2 killers, we would extend life by 5 to 7 years. If you address the hallmarks of aging, which is really maps across the field of functional medicine almost perfectly, you would extend life by 20, 30, or 40 years. So that means instead of living to 80, you'll live to 120. And I think it's in the realm of possibility for everybody in this room to get to 100 years old. 120 is hard. We haven't got many people there
But you're
yet.
going to do it.
I'm counting on living long enough so that the science advances fast enough so I can keep doing the things that are going to keep me going backwards. So I'm working to get in 29. I don't know if I'll get there, but we'll see. Maybe I'll be younger than my wife soon. So, so the answer to your question around
Longevity switches.
the lung, yeah, I know I'm not demented yet.
Just a little boost.
I don't need a teleprompter. I'm good. So longevity switches, this idea came up with after really diving into the research around longevity. I don't actually use that term in the book, but I came up after because I basically looked at, what are the master regulators of our biology? And what I really realized is that we have these ancient conserved longevity pathways, survival pathways embedded in our biology. Everything from an earthworm all the way up to us has these, even a yeast has these pathways. And they're regulated in ways that actually control the aging process. And you probably know what they are, even though you don't really know what I'm talking about, because you've probably heard about things like mTOR or rapamycin or fasting, or maybe taking metformin for aging, or maybe that red wine is good for you because it has resveratrol, or maybe you should not eat so much sugar because it's bad for you. You've heard about these things kind of in a general way, but what I want to explain to you is that there are these four ancient conserved pathways that are part of this system that goes wrong as we get older called deregulated nutrient sensing. So it's how our bodies and our cells and our genes are sensing our diet essentially and our environment. But they're not just actually just regulated by diet. They're regulated by even a sauna or a cold plunge or ozone therapy or a lot of other things, herbs. Other things will regulate these pathways, but they're primarily regulated by food. The first one is insulin signaling, and this is really important because this controls your blood sugar and all the diseases of aging: heart disease, cancer, diabetes, dementia. They're all did I miss any? No. Are all diseases of insulin resistance, which means your body is not good at controlling your blood sugar very well, and that you make more and more insulin because your body gets resistant to the insulin, and that insulin has a whole bunch of side effects when you have too much insulin because you're eating too much starch and sugar, and you get belly fat. So if you want to do a test for it, you can. It's called the mirror test. You look in the mirror with no shirt on, and you jump up and down, and if your stomach jiggles, you probably have it. There are more sophisticated tests like a DEXA scan or body composition analysis and things, but your body composition matters, and this visceral belly fat drives most of the disease of aging, and it is a source of inflammation. It's a source of dysregulated hormones, and it basically causes all the disease of aging. So that's the first one, and our diet sucks. I mean, we eat about 152 pounds of sugar and 133 pounds of flour per person per year in America. That's almost 3/4 of a pound per person per day. I'm not having that much, so some of you I know are having more. and that is one of the most important things you can take out of this talk is if you want to live a long time, you've got to dramatically cut down on sugar and starch, basically flour and sugar in any form. And when people start asking, what about this? What about this? I know they're addicted to sugar. Can I have stevia? Can I have this monk fruit? Can I have this artificial sweetener? What about this? Anything, I mean, the artificial sweetener is a little different, but anything that you think of as sweet or sugar is going to drive this process. So that's the first one. And it's pretty easy to control, by doing exercise, by reducing your starch and sugar intake and getting rid of that belly fat. If you get rid of that belly fat, that's the single biggest thing that's going to drive a faster rate of aging. The second pathway is called mTOR. Now, two of the pathways are detecting too much of stuff. It's like too much sugar and starch, and the mTOR pathway is detecting too much protein or even sugar also. And then there's two other pathways that detect scarcity. So these pathways regulate longevity. In fact, one of these guys was a friend of mine, Jorge Plutsky. He's a Cuban Jew from Harvard Medical School who basically is a preventive cardiologist. He said, look, if you took a group of 100-year-old people and you looked at the one thing they had in common, it would be that they were insulin sensitive. So that's important. Second is mTOR. mTOR stands for mammalian targeted rapamycin. Rapamycin is a drug that was discovered in Rapa Nui. It's basically from the dirt, the soil, and they got it from an organism that was producing this compound that they named rapamycin after Rapa Nui, Easter Island. And it's been used in medicine for transplant medicine. It's an immune suppressant when you take it at high doses. It was an antifungal, didn't really work well. And scientists have been looking at it, had this unique property of inhibiting this pathway that was named after the drug. And when you inhibit mTOR, you activate this process of cleanup in the body. So the body has this embedded renewal, regenerative repair system, and we have to learn how to activate it on a regular daily basis. And it doesn't have to be that hard. You just like developing habits. And when you do that, you can actually activate these longevity pathways. So mTOR, a lot of confusion happens around this, and I can talk about the protein thing now because it's kind of related to this. Because people say, well, should I be a vegan? And you probably heard David Sinclair talk about why you should never eat meat and be a vegan, and if you and only eat once a day if you want to live to be 100. And on the other hand, you've got people like Peter Attia talking about you need a gram of protein per body weight of animal protein every day if you want to live to be 100. So I'm sure you're all confused out there, right? What do I do? Think of it like Goldilocks. You know, it can't be too hot or too cold. On the one hand, if you're vegan and you don't get the amino acid called leucine, which is very low in plant protein, if you don't get that at the right amount in a meal, which is about 2.5 to 3 grams, you don't turn on the switch to build muscle. Now, muscle is the most important thing that you need to focus on as you get older. Cardio is great, but muscle and building muscle is key to longevity because it is actually the thing that keeps you functional, just being able to do what you want, but also is where your mitochondria live, it's where metabolism is, it's what regulates your blood sugar and insulin, it regulates hormones like testosterone and sex hormones, it regulates inflammation, it's super important. So muscle is the neglected organ. And if you don't have this amount of protein in a meal, you can't turn this muscle protein synthesis on and you lose muscle. I mean, you see people who get older, what happens? They look frail and shriveled. But you don't have to. If you go on Instagram and see this guy, Alain Gustave, you'll see he's not old and shriveled. He's like more ripped. He looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger, but he's like 80 years old.
So can I ask you, are all animal proteins equal? Are you talking
fish is a little less, like 4 ounces of meat or chicken is like 6 ounces of fish.
Okay.
And basically, you have to eat like 4 ounces of meat to get 30 grams of protein. You need to eat about 6 cups of brown rice or 2 cups of beans to get the same amount of protein, which is hard to do. And so, you can be vegan, but you have to supplement with processed plant proteins, and you have to supplement them with extra amino acids. So you can do it, but you have to actually have that. It's just science. It's not like a ideology. It's not based on. I'm not talking about like whether it's moral or not moral. I'm just saying, just in terms of biology, if you want to build muscle, and the studies are clear on this, you need the right amount of leucine.
And is there like an age at which that sort of triggers?
Well, when you're younger, you have a lot of hormonal trophic support to build muscle. So you don't necessarily need as much protein. When you get older, you need more because there's something called anabolic resistance. And that means it's harder to build muscle. So you need about 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight of high quality protein with at least that much leucine. So for example, for me, I have a 40, 50 grams of protein in the morning and a goat whey shake, and then I'll have, piece of chicken or fish or meat for lunch or dinner. And it's not onerous, but I get about 150 grams of protein a day. And it can be 0.7 to 1 gram, depends on how much you're working out, what you're doing. But it's one of those non-negotiable things as you get older in order to build muscle. And the other part of it, the mTOR, is aside from muscle building, which is so important, is that when you inhibit it, it actually does this wonderful thing called autophagy, which is like the self-cleaning oven thing. So you have all these old proteins, old cells, old parts, and it basically gobbles them up like a Pac-Man and digests them and then recycles them, and you get new stuff. So if you're fasting, if you're starving, and of course, many of us, don't starve anymore, but historically, we didn't know where food was coming from. There was no Whole Foods or Erewhon, so we'd have to go hunting and gathering. Sometimes it wasn't easy to find food. So we have these pathways that when we weren't eating, kept us alive and kept us actually repairing and healing. So when you do this process of autophagy, you're reducing inflammation, oxidative stress, you're repairing DNA, you're activating all these incredible longevity switches in your system. So it's important to sort of understand how to regulate mTOR. So you want to fast overnight, and it shouldn't really be called fasting. It's just called breakfast, right? You just eat dinner and then don't eat till breakfast.
But you do give a time period. You said like 12 to 14
like
hours.
if you eat dinner at 6 o'clock at night, you have breakfast at 8. That's a 14-hour fast. That's fine. If you want to go a little longer, 16 hours, that has a benefit. Now, for some people can't tolerate it and need to be eating, more, but everybody can do a 12-hour overnight fast. 14 hours usually not a problem. And that gives you time to do this autophagy process. And then what's really important is not just the overnight fast that's important, but it's the refeeding. When you refeed, and you refeed with protein, not what most of us have for breakfast, which is sugar, right? We have muffins, bagels, croissants, juices, sugary smoothies, whatever. That is the worst thing you could do.
So would a longer fast be even more beneficial?
Not necessarily. I mean, you have this point of diminishing returns. If you fast too much, you start to lose muscle. So if you do too much intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating, you might lose muscle. So, but you can do sometimes periodic fasts, that's fine. But we still don't know, But mTOR definitely is important to inhibit and then to turn on. And the first morning meal is the most important because that's when you're turning on muscle protein synthesis, stem cell renewal and regeneration, reduce inflammation, all these beneficial things happen. So that's mTOR. And so basically just make sure you don't eat overnight. And there's all these other practices that stimulate mTOR, like hormesis, which we'll talk about, which is stress that doesn't kill you that makes you stronger, like a sauna or a cold plunge. That will also do it. Certain nutrients or phytochemicals will do it, like pomegranate has a compound called urolithin A that you can actually now buy as a supplement because most of us, it's called a postbiotic. So when you've heard of prebiotics like, fiber, and you've heard of probiotics. Postbiotics are molecules that are made by bacteria that interact with your biology, and probably a third of all the molecules in your blood are from bacteria that are living in you. So you want to have the right bacteria. That's a whole other conversation. But the urolithin A actually works to stimulate mitophagy, which is like mitochondrial cleanup, and stimulate mTOR. So does olive oil. So does berberine. A lot of phytochemicals. So there's a lot of ways to do it. And I write about them all in the book.
Could you just define for a second for people who might not understand it? So we've got probiotics, prebiotics, and postbiotics. Could you just quickly explain?
For example, if you eat pomegranate and you have the right bacteria in your stomach, which a lot of us don't, because who here has never taken an antibiotic? Okay, nobody. Okay. So we kill off a lot of the good stuff. And when you eat pomegranate, if you have the right bacteria, it'll convert some of the ellagic acid in the pomegranate, the phytochemical, into something called urolithin A. That then interacts with mTOR, with mitochondria, increases your VO2 max, fitness, muscle mass, inflammation reduction. It's quite amazing. So all these phytochemicals are really a key part of longevity, which I talk a lot about in the book. So you can regulate a lot of these longevity switches with phytochemicals, with hormesis, with different strategies around food. The other two pathways are AMPK. And by the way, mTOR, there's a lot of research on rapamycin going on. So who's heard of rapamycin? Yeah, that was one of the things I've done for the last 2 years. So I don't know I did all this stuff. I don't actually know what it did but I'm going to keep doing all of it because it worked. But the rapamycin, if you're a true scientist, you just do that one thing. And they have done these studies, and NIH has a sort of a lab that looks for molecules that are longevity molecules, and it's kind of the top. It's the all-star. And this molecule inhibits mTOR. And you can take it on a cyclical basis. The studies show like maybe once a week, 6 milligrams, or maybe you take it periodically, take a month off, or a couple of months off. So we're still figuring it out, but I think it's a very promising compound that without the side effects that happen if you take it all the time. AMPK you might have heard about because who's heard about metformin for longevity? Anybody? Metformin is a diabetes drug around since 1957, and activates AMPK. AMPK is activated in a low nutrient state. So, and so if you overeat sugar and stuff, it gets screwed up and it degrades as we age. And so this drug, metformin, works on AMPK to regulate blood sugar and insulin resistance, and that's one of the reasons they're talking about it for longevity. But it has one problem, which is that it inhibits something called mitochondrial complex 1. What that means is that when you make energy from food and oxygen in your mitochondria, the little factories in your cells that make energy, you have a problem. It doesn't go as well. And in studies where they do placebo or metformin plus progressive resistance training, meaning strength training, the people who took the metformin don't build muscle. So that worries me. And there's some other kind of potential side effects. But there's a big trial going now with Nir Barzilai. I have a podcast called The Doctor's Pharmacy. Many of you probably listen to it. I did a great podcast with him on this topic. So he's like the world's expert. But they're doing a double-blind randomized controlled trial of like, I think, 3,000 or 4,000 people. It'll be out in a number of years, and we'll have an answer. But right now I'm on a pause on that one. But AMPK, again, just by reducing sugar and starch, quercetin is incredible for that. So quercetin is a plant phytochemical that's found in onions and things like that, berries, that activates AMPK. It was also great for COVID. And there's an incredible source of quercetin and a lot of other these phytochemicals that helps rejuvenate not only your blood sugar, but your immune system. And it comes from a plant that's been forgotten for thousands of years called Himalayan tartary buckwheat. And this is a special form of buckwheat that grows up in the mountains in the Himalayas in really tough conditions. And the more stress a plant has, the more of these beneficial compounds it has. Right? When you eat a wild strawberry, it's this big, but it tastes amazing compared to like a store-bought strawberry that might say that looks good, but tastes like cardboard. Why? The phytochemicals. So the phytochemicals create the flavor in the food, natural flavor. And so you want to eat foods like that. And Himalayan tartary buckwheat activates AMPK in an incredible way and also helps with all these other longevity things and reverses biological age in studies. And you can get it as a supplement. You can get it as a powder. I actually put a Himalayan tartary buckwheat sprouted powder. So they sprout the buckwheat and make a powder out of it. So it's like pre-cooked. I throw it in my smoothie every morning. So that's a great way to turn it on. Also, Hormesis turns it on, like saunas, cold plunges, things like that.
Could we just go into Hormesis a little bit, just so people understand it a little better?
Yeah.
You describe it in the book, as you said earlier, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And then you have, I think, maybe 8 of them that you bring up. And some of them, I think, would be pretty common for people, but I think it'd be interesting just to
Okay, so
talk about it.
definitely going to get to that in 2 seconds.
Okay.
But I want to finish the 4th longevity switch,
Right.
which I know I'm rambling here. Not really, but anyway, I like to. So is this understandable? Are you following me? You good? Okay, not too high level. How many I'm losing most of you, or no? Okay. So the next one's sirtuins. You probably heard about that. That's what David Sinclair is famous for.
Say it again.
Sirtuins.
Sirtuins.
That's what David Sinclair is famous. SIRTUINS. And that actually is a pathway that, again, that if you activate will cause DNA repair, reduce inflammation, prevent stop cancer cells from growing, improve mitochondrial function and new mitochondria. It's quite amazing. And the best way to stimulate it is with NAD. And you might have heard of NAD, people getting NAD infusions or NMN or NR, True Nitrogen. You probably heard about this stuff. David's working on a lot of stuff around NMN. So you can activate sirtuins through NMN. And you can take it supplements, but you also activate it through phytochemicals. You can activate it through also Hormesis. So a lot of things that we're talking about. So in answer to Hormesis is kind of an interesting concept. So I talked about this Himalayan tartary buckwheat. This is a plant that had to live in a really shitty environment, like crappy soil, high altitude, not much water, cold temperatures, just not a lot going on up there. And it had to survive. And when you have to survive, when things are tough, you actually live longer. And they've done these studies like concentration camp survivors. They live really long. And it's because they went through this period of extreme stress and starvation, which activated a lot of these longevity pathways. And so these phytochemicals are higher in these stress plants. So we live in these perfectly controlled environments. It's 68 degrees. We drive everywhere. We don't have to use our bodies. It's like we live in this bubble where all the things that used to keep us strong and alive, we don't do anymore, right? Like periodic not eating. That's probably one of the biggest hormetic stresses. And calorie restriction is the single thing that that scientists have proved that will extend life by a third. So if you eat a third less calories, you'll live a third longer, meaning you'll live to be 120. But you'll be miserable because you'll be starving all the time and hangry, and you won't feel very good. So, so Hormesis is basically stuff that you can do to yourself now by this overnight fast, 12, 14 hours. Exercise is a form of Hormesis. When you lift weights, you're tearing muscle fibers, right? You're stressing your system, but you're making them grow back stronger. So people are familiar with that. But there's a lot of other kinds. Saunas, 170 degrees sauna for 15, 20 minutes. A lot of studies on this in Finland because there's enough saunas for everybody in Finland to be in the sauna at the same time. And the control group was like somebody who did sauna once a week because everybody has saunas there. But if you do 4 times a week, you reduce your risk of cardiovascular mortality by 57%, risk of death, pretty impressive. It increases heat shock proteins, which repair damaged proteins, part of the aging process. It activates your innate immune system. It helps increase your cardiovascular health, your autonomic nervous system, has so many benefits. Cold plunge, I tried one today in the river here, but it wasn't that cold. I was like excited to get into the mountain river, and I was like, oh, this is not that cold. But when you go doing cold plunge, it's a shock to the system, and it activates brown fat, which is where all your mitochondria are. It increases dopamine, increases cognitive function, improves your immune system. And these are stresses. Other kinds are hypoxia. So you're living at altitude here. That's good. Actually, it increases your resilience in metabolic health. Also, being on a hypoxic exercise device. It could just be a mask you buy on Amazon, or they're more fancy machines. But hypoxia, when you exercise, also induces a lot of benefits. There's machines like Celtran, which are hypoxia machines. You put a mask on your face, takes you up to Mount Everest, and then back down, and back up, and back down, and you're kind of air hungry when you get up, and you come back down. And that activates these cellular cleanup and repair process for your mitochondria. Also, ozone, it's another stress. It's an oxidative stress. Ozone is a very reactive molecule, but it increases your body's then response by activating anti-inflammatory pathways, antioxidant pathways, builds stem cells, and improves your mitochondria, and does all these amazing things. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy, same thing. You're going under pressure. You're putting your body in a stress, a high oxygen state, and under high pressure. So there's a lot of these hormetic therapies that are available out there that you can incorporate into your life. So I try to do as much as I can. I'd like to do sauna, cold plunge. I don't eat overnight. I obviously exercise. Those are the easy ones. Ozone's a little harder to get. Hyperbaric's a little harder, but a lot of people have them in their house. I'm staying with a friend. He's got one in his house, garage. They're not that expensive. You can get them now and do them at home. So these are all things that I would encourage people to activate their stress response regularly, because it really tends to activate these longevity pathways.
So we had talked a little bit in your book. You describe a number of potentially amazing advancements that maybe aren't available now, but could eventually affect our longevity. And I just wanted to ask what I'll say a few that you'd mentioned in there I thought were really interesting. The genome, microbiome, metabolome mapping, implantable devices that track our biomarkers in real time. I think my favorite was 3D printing of organs eventually. Nanobots that deliver medicines and treatments into our body without any pain or anything. So whether it's one of those or another, what do you think are the most interesting advancements, and when do you think they might be available for?
Well, there's all the stuff I'm talking about, which is sort of the fundamentals. But when things go wrong and we haven't taken care of ourselves and we need to go to the body shop, there's cool stuff coming down the pike, right? We now can get joint replacements or a heart transplant. But we'll be doing 3D printing of organs soon. We're going to use nanotechnology to put nanobots in to deliver medicines precisely. There's going to be gene editing that, maybe we'll be able to implant Yamanaka factors, which are these really cool transcription factors that regulate your genes that affect longevity, and you can literally implant them in your system and then turn them on when you feel like you're getting a little too old, and maybe you're getting gray hair, or your sex drive's not so good, or your muscle mass is low, and then it kind of reverses you back by actually activating your cells to reverse into new kind of pluripotent stem cells. There's also cool things like follistatin gene therapy, which I tried, which is where you basically inject a plasmid delivery device to put RNA, like the microRNA we did for COVID, like RNA into your cells that then produces this inhibitor of myostatin. Myostatin is a compound your body makes to inhibit muscle. Myo is muscle. So as you get older, you have a lot of this myostatin, which makes it hard to build muscle. So you can take like these gene therapies like that, or clotho is coming down the pike. So there's a lot of really cool technologies that are coming down the pike. But the things that I think right now that are available that are, I think, if you have disposable income and you want to try stuff, I think some of the most promising things are plasmapheresis. Basically, it's like, I don't know if you ever heard of like the Blood Boy thing that Peter Thiel talked about. It was a Silicon Valley like series on it, and essentially where you get the blood of a young guy, or you heard about that? And
This is not stem cell. This is completely
no,
different.
it's different.
Okay.
But, like Chairman Mao used to get the blood of Red Army soldiers and infuse it, and it's kind of like basically they did these experiments called parabiosis where they sewed up the circulation of a young and old mouse, and they watched what happened. And the old mouse became young. And like, oh, what's going on here? Is it the young mouse that's making the old mouse young, or is something else happening? They couldn't figure it out. So they tried this technology called plasmapheresis. It's been around forever in medicine. Basically, where they take your blood out, they pick out one arm, they separate out the cells, so the platelets, red cells, white cells. Then they take the plasma, which is the big soup that everything floats in, but it contains a lot of stuff, like inflammatory stuff, damaged proteins, infectious molecules, just kind of, it's like kind of where all the waste goes. And it's like a oil and filter change. And they filter that out, and they throw the plasma out, and they put back in albumin, which is the main protein in your blood. And they found the old mice became young. Then they started doing these studies on humans, and they're finding this in Alzheimer's. They're actually reversing Alzheimer's with this. For long COVID, it's unbelievably effective. And you can actually, clean out a lot of the things. And so the data on this is very promising, and I think it's one of the most promising things. There's a number of other theories, like hyperbaric oxygen also is very promising in some studies out of Israel where they're looking at doing 60 sessions for 90 minutes over 3 months, about an hour and a half in the tank. And that seemed to reverse zombie cells, which are the zombie cells, part of the hallmarks of aging, these cells that don't die but kind of hang around and infect other cells and make them all inflamed. Increases telomere length. So hyperbarics are cool. Ozone, I think, is also probably pretty promising for a lot of the same reasons. And people are using peptides for hormonal support or repair and health and injury. So there's a lot of things out there that kind of people play with. But I would say I think plasmapheresis and ozone, hyperbarics are really top. And then there's this other thing, which I'll just mention, which is phospholipid exchange. So all of us know we live in a toxic world. You're probably reading about articles that there's microplastics in people's penises they're finding, and in their heart and everywhere. And it's like, we're just polluted. Like if we were food as humans, we wouldn't be safe to eat. We're just toxic. And as we get older, these toxins accumulate because you're exposed to more stuff. And we finally can measure this through a lab in Germany. We can measure the intracellular toxins because they're all stored in fat. And all your cells are made up of fat. The cell membrane is a fat membrane. And it's made up of something called phosphatidylcholine. And so you can actually give yourself large doses of this, plus a bunch of vitamins and detoxifying things, and flush out all the toxins, repair your mitochondria. I've done this, and it literally is one of the single most effective things I've done for me, and just more energy, more brain clarity. Just, I didn't need to be reminded about the longevity switches. But it was like, it's quite amazing. And I think and I have a patient with dementia that I've been using it on, and Parkinson's that have like reversing it. So I think it's a very promising treatment. We call it the PK protocol. It's about 10 weeks, 2 treatments a week of IVs, and testing before and after. But I think that's going to be another very promising thing.
So we only have about 5 minutes before we come to questions with everybody else. And I thought you have a term that you use in your book called democratization of medicine, which I thought was really interesting. Yeah. And you've created a company called functionhealth.com, which you say is a bit about democratizing that. So you can go on it and get baseline tests. I want you to just talk about that and why that's important, the baseline tests, and why you like this idea of democratizing medicine.
So I mean, we're in an era where people want to know what's going on in their bodies. I mean, I have an Oura Ring, I have a Garmin watch. Many of you have biosensors on right now, whether it's your Apple Watch or an Oura Ring or some other device. And most of us want to know and take ownership of our health, and I think you're all here because of that, and yet medicine has been very, very much a guild and very centralized and very paternalistic, and unfortunately, you don't have easy access to your health data. I mean, might have done labs here at this lab, or you might have got this test here, or seen this doctor, and it's like, there's no crosstalk or communication. I mean, it's crazy how analog medicine is right now. And, I'm sure probably many of you want to be my patient after listening to me, but like, there's only one of me, so I can't see that many people. Like, how do we get this to everybody, right? And so I co-founded a company called Function Health, which is designed to democratize and decentralize healthcare by giving you access to your own biological data and using AI machine learning to help understand this bigger concept of the paradigm shift of network medicine, applying that to you, personalizing and creating predictive analytics of what the likely issues you're hard to deal with, and then what to do about them. And it's an iterative process. It's dynamic, and it's a health portal where it'll suck up everything. So it starts with, right now, $4.99. It's $15,000 worth of lab tests for $499, twice a year testing, 110 plus biomarkers, stuff you're not typically getting from your doctor, like nutrient testing, toxin testing, metabolic testing, the right lipid testing, and lots more. All driven by sort of insights that you get about what to do about it, and ultimately we're going to be able to taking pretty soon all your biosensor data, all your lab data that you've ever done that you've done everywhere else, your entire medical record. We're going to be informing all of it with all the world's scientific literature, with all the world's knowledge experts in different domains, informed by the new paradigm, systems medicine, and that's going to create what I call medical intelligence, which will allow you to interrogate the system to find out what's going on for you. Because all of us are different. All of us need different things. No two people with even the same disease have the same problem, right? Dementia is just a name that we give to people who can't remember stuff. Diabetes is the name we give to people whose blood sugar isn't controlled. Rheumatoid arthritis is the name we give to people whose joints hurt. But it doesn't tell you anything about the cause. So I would say just because you know the name of the disease doesn't mean you know what's wrong with you. So what root cause medicine is, what we do is with this model, we're going to be able to actually help map all this out in a way that's never been done before. And we're the fastest growing healthcare company now in the world. We started about a year plus ago to launch in April, and we have over 50,000 members. There's 300,000 people on the wait list. We just did a Series A with Andreessen for $45 million, and it's going like this because people want this, and I think there's a code. There's a wait list, so you can't get in. But if you use the code, the access code of Aspen 100, you all get in if you want.
It's a little
Aspen
secret.
100.
So before
If you give it out, we'll have to kill you. We'll track you down, find you. But
So before we turn it over, just one last thing. You have an incredible diet and everything, but when I counted up in your book how many supplements you're taking,
how many I'm taking?
well, based on what I saw in your book when I was reading it, it was 14 plus. So leaving the audience with a couple
what's the
takeaways,
basics?
what would be the basics? Yes, for those who don't want to take 14 supplements a day.
So, basically what people say is the more I love you, the more supplements I recommend for you. But I'm a little on the extreme end. But I've also had a lot of issues. I've had mercury poisoning and mold toxicity and autoimmune diseases. And I had to learn so much about how to heal because I had to heal myself. So I take a multivitamin. I take vitamin D with K2. I take a special form fish oil. I take magnesium. I take probiotics. Those are probably the foundational things that everybody should be taking. And that will cover most of the bases. And then for my longevity stack, I take something called Senolytics. So there's a product I really like called Qualia. I don't have any relationship with that, but it's called Qualia Senolytic. And it's basically once a month you take 2 days in a row, 6 pills. And it basically has all these zombie-killing components in it, like fisetin, which comes from strawberry, or things that come from green tea or curcumin. I also take NMN, which is the kind of sirtuin activator. I take urolithin A, the pomegranate thing I told you about, called MitoPure, which is a company from Switzerland. I take a number of mitochondrial nutrients because I've had a lot of mitochondrial issues like CoQ10, lipoic acid. I also take something called N-acetylcysteine, which helps my glutathione that depletes as we age to help detox. So I take a fair bit of stuff. But I think for most people, just with the first things I said, and if you want to pick like a couple of things for the extra longevity stuff, I would probably say the Qualia Senolytic, probably NMN. I like younger NMN, but there's different brands. And my third would probably be the Himalayan tartary buckwheat. Oh, and my fourth would be the Mitopure.
I tried to get them down.
Those are the ones that have the most research that I think have the most impact, and that I got to 39, so it worked for me.
Yeah. So we're going to open it up now to the audience. I think there are microphones. You have a microphone right there? Okay. And the first hand I saw go up was right over here, right there, yes.
Mark, thank you very much. Can you discuss microbiome and the diseases that dysfunction in the microbiome might cause, and then how do you test the microbiome to see if it's healthy?
Great question. So the microbiome is one of the hallmarks of aging. So the progressive degradation of our gut ecosystem. So, you have about, 37 trillion cells. You probably have about, 40 or so trillion bacteria in your gut. You have about 20,000 genes, but there are probably 2 to 5 million bacterial genes. So you're outnumbered 100 to 1 in terms of genetic material. And as I said before, the microbiome is regulating almost everything that's going on with your health. And it's something that doctors know almost nothing about. And when you look at the list of things that it's connected to, everything from autism to depression, to cancer, to heart disease, to diabetes, to obesity, to dementia, to autoimmune disease, to asthma. I mean, I could go on and on and on. So pretty much every condition is in some way controlled by what's going on in the microbiome and the health of that ecosystem. And a lot of us have what we call leaky gut, basically because of our processed diet, because of food additives. I mean, the average person in America eats 60% of their diet is ultra-processed food, and those people eat 22 pounds of food additives a year, including a lot of emulsifiers, which damage the gut. And when you have a leaky gut, when you have bad bacteria, it creates inflammation. 60% of your immune system is in your gut. Why? Because it's where you're interacting with the outside world and dealing with all these foreign stuff like food and bacteria. And the key to longevity is really keeping your microbiome healthy. And it's not easy to do in our modern world because a lot of things we do mess it up. All the sugar and starch, all the processed food, alcohol, and stress, and all the toxins that we're exposed to. So it's really important to learn how to tend your inner garden. And I talk a lot about that in the book, but it's a key part of keeping healthy is optimizing your gut and optimizing your microbiome. Testing is tricky. I mean, there are a number of labs that I've used for years that don't just look at the microbiome itself, because it's one thing to know the bacteria, but it's also important to know the metabolic function in there. How's your enzymes? What are the short-chain fatty acids that are the main indicator of a healthy ecosystem? Do you have any parasites? Or do you have healthy bugs or not healthy bugs? Do you have important species that you should have or you don't have these species? So it's a really complex test that I use from Genova Diagnostic Labs called GIFX. There's other labs that are doing microbiome testing. But it's important to know what to make of it, because you're also just checking your poop at one point in time. It changes every day, depending on what you eat. So you have to kind of look at it. You have to know how to interpret it. But I use that to help optimize people's gut. And when I'm treating disease, the first thing I do is get people's gut. I change their diet and get them healthy and gut health repair. It's like number 1 and 2 in terms of rebooting people's health. Basically it's eating plenty of fiber, prebiotics, probiotic foods, and taking probiotics. And staying away from all the bad stuff.
This gentleman right here.
Mark, the term geographic blue zones, whether your old age is prevalent, and it's not a painful angry old age, is people aging. I doubt they pump iron. I doubt they take probiotics. How do you describe why those blue zones exist?
Well, Dan Buettner is a good friend. He was the one who sort of popularized this idea. Was sort of discovered. These were discovered by a scientist, and the reason they're called blue zones is because he was trying to find the areas where people live the longest on the planet, and he had a blue pen, and he would circle it with a blue pen. That was called the blue zone. And I visited many of them, and I spent a lot of time there in Sardinia and in Korea, and I write about it in the book. And, you know, they have automatic setup for longevity. You know, you can do that in your own life. You just have to set your life up for that. The automatic things they do is they eat incredibly nutrient-dense, phytochemically rich food. They eat a lot of wild foods, mushrooms, greens. I mean, in Korea they have like winter greens, summer greens. They grow their own food. There's nothing. I mean, they don't call it organic, but it's all organic, right? The animals are all heirloom animals. The animals, like for example, in Sardinia, they have sheep and goat. Basically, they're herders. So they naturally exercise. This guy Pietro was 95 years old. He was hiking up 5 miles a day. Herding his sheep. I mean, he was straight as a rod at 95, booming voice, clear eyes, naturally just moving. But also the sheep and the goat, they know if I actually graze them on this wild plant at this time of year, it's going to be better. Not that they're not thinking, oh, it's got phytochemicals that'll make me live long. They're going to taste better. This one guy, Olinto, said he served me a nose-to-tail pig meal that he grew with a pig. He said, we flavor the animal before we kill it. I'm like, what do you mean? He says, well, we feed it acorns and carob and this and that. And so they naturally have incredibly phytochemically rich diet. They naturally move. They have an incredible social network and connection. There's no nursing homes there. There was one guy, Carmine, was 84. His wife died. Didn't have kids or something, and he was living with he had kids, but he was living with his kids. Another one was Julie, which was 100 years old. She never got married, but she was living with her niece. Like, people are still engaged and working, and there's no retirement there. And this guy Carmine, it was crazy. We were driving down this little town, and it was kind of an interesting town because it was on the side of a mountain, and there was this town higher up, and then there was this abandoned town lower down. Apparently, it was like a mudslide, and sort of washed his town out in the 50s, and he grew up there, and he still had his family farm there. And we were driving out of the town. And he literally parked his car in front of our car in the middle of the road, and he wouldn't let us go by, and he waved to us to come to sit and talk to him. So we literally sat, and who does this, right? We sat on this stone wall for like an hour talking about his life and philosophy and all the books he was reading, and then he took us down his farm, and he showed us, he had tons of trees and a huge garden, and he had animals, and he was doing all himself. He had 6 sheep, and he says, come on up here, and there was a very steep thing. We had to go trail through the woods, and the sheep ran up, and he ran up, and I couldn't barely keep up with him. And I was riding my bike 2.5 hours a day up steep mountains, and this guy was 86 years old. So I think, they naturally do the things that matter. They naturally have community. They naturally eat well. They naturally exercise. They move. They don't drink too much. They have a little bit. Even the wine they have, like this, in Korea they had this guy showed me the way they made wine, which was in these clay pots, and it's not got all these preservatives in it, all this stuff in it, and you just feel different, How they made how you made preserved ham from with seaweed and all these and grape leaves and all these things that I don't know. It was fascinating. So I think there's a lot of reasons. It's hard to reproduce all that here, but the take homes of your diet and your exercise and community is huge, and keeping this going. Yeah.
We have time for maybe 2 more. Right there. I'm sorry. My eyes aren't
Hi.
terrific.
I just finished Lifespan by David St. Clair, and I'd like to hear about some of the leading thoughts that he had, which seemed to mirror a lot of your thoughts.
You'd like to hear how my thoughts are different, or what?
No, how they mirror.
They mirror, yeah. No. David's a friend. I mean, he's a brilliant guy. He really has sort of done a tremendous amount of research in longevity space, particularly around NMN and sirtuins, as this is sort of his focus and area. I think we agree on probably 80 or 90% of everything. The place where I don't really agree with him is what I talked about before about this mTOR issue, because there's this 2 camps. mTOR, you have to inhibit it all the time, fast, never eat meat. Another group is you need to stimulate mTOR to build muscle, but you kind of have to do both. Sleeping is really good for longevity, but if all you did was sleep all day, it wouldn't be good for you. Broccoli is good for you, But if all you ate was broccoli, it wouldn't be good for you, right? So it's really about finding that balance. And I think, his book is quite good. I would say he's an academic. And he says that. He says, look, I'm not going to give you advice because I'm a researcher. But here's kind of what I'm finding. I mean, he says a few things in there that are kind of interesting, like longevity escape velocity is a concept that, is that if the discoveries that are happening are happening so fast that we're going to reach a point where for every year we're alive, we're going to be able to extend our life a year longer or a few months longer, so you kind of never reach death. Now, I'm friends with this guy, Brian Johnson, and you've probably heard of him. This guy is like doing an experiment himself. His big thing is don't die. So he's devoting all of his time, energy, and money to not dying. So he finishes eating at 11 o'clock in the morning. He only has sex at certain times. He can't have a girlfriend and sleep in the same bed. It's like,
fun.
Doesn't sound like fun to me. But anyway, he's an interesting guy. I think he's the science experiment for the rest of us humans to see what can be done. But he's but he's also sort of very focused on some of these same concepts. But I think it depends on what's going on for you, and there's no single answer. There's only the answer that's right for you, and the personalization that's key, and that's part of the function promise is real true personalization in a way that's never been done before.
I'm going to get somebody from the back of the room. Right in the middle there with 2 hands up. Yes. Goalpost.
Hi, I'm just want to get a little bit into probiotics. In my own practice, when I prescribed antibiotics, I always recommended some type of yogurt or something similar. But more recently, our daughter-in-law received a few years ago a PhD in microbiology, and her thesis was basically the ineffectiveness of swallowing bacteria in a pill form because most of them are inactivated by the stomach acid. So I'm sort of on a fence now about how I really feel about what I've believed throughout my career and what I'm seeing now from this particular PhD thesis that was defended, that over-the-counter probiotics are virtually worthless. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, great question. I mean, this all got started from, Lactobacillus bulgarius, where the people in Bulgaria were living in the mountains and eating yogurt and living a long time, and everybody kind of got into this whole idea. This is not a new idea that we need to have fermented foods, that they're healthy. And the bottom line is not all probiotics are created equal, and many of them are, like you said, worthless. But that doesn't mean all of them are. And they do have impact, and there is a lot of research on them in terms of the efficacy, but it depends on the strain, the type, and which one. And so I think they're a key part of my practice, but I would say that more important than probiotics is your diet, because literally you're putting in pounds of food, and you're not just feeding yourself, you're feeding the trillions of microbes in your gut. And if you feed them the wrong stuff, the bad ones are going to grow. They're creating disease and inflammation. If you feed them the right stuff, you're going to get a healthy microbiome that it does all the opposite things. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, prebiotics are really important, and you can take prebiotics as powders in your food, like plantains, asparagus, artichoke hearts, jicama. There's a lot of things we eat, green bananas, all have great prebiotic properties. And so I encourage people to include those in their diet, and include fermented foods like sauerkraut and kimchi and miso and all that stuff. So all that's great, but it's really you've got to. Your bugs love fiber, so you got to feed them the right kinds of fiber. And you have to not be eating the stuff that's causing them to kind of go sideways. But I think it's not as simple as probiotics don't work or they do work. It's it's like anything else. I mean, if you go to Costco and you buy a bunch of vitamins, good luck, right? But if you know what you're doing, there are nutrients that are designed properly, that are formulated properly, that have the right form of the nutrient, that are bioavailable, that actually are encapsulated or in forms that actually get through the gut. So yeah, if you just take stuff, they will be inactivated if it's the wrong stuff. But the right ones work.
Is it a really, really, really quick question? We have a minute. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can hear you.
If you had diabetes, you would measure your blood glucose levels, and you would take something and follow what happens to the blood glucose.
Right.
You're taking all kinds of stuff. How do you know that they're working, and are you prepared to follow or track it with bio?
This is a really, really important question. What you're basically asking is, like, if you have diabetes and you take this one drug or one pill, you see what happens and measure it, you know it's working. But if I'm doing all these things, how do I know it's working, right? And it's a conundrum in medicine because medicine is designed to further pharmaceutical companies' interests by what we call the randomized controlled trial, which essentially divides people into two groups. One group gets the drug, one group doesn't. You match them and you see what happens. And you're only studying one mechanism or one pathway. But if I said, how do you create a healthy human? Well, you need to eat healthy food. But if you only eat healthy food and never exercise and never slept, you're going to die, right? So the problem is we need to think in systems, and we need to be able to measure the complexity. And it's not easy. And there's a whole approach at the NIH now called N of 1 research, which is the highest level of research, which is using your own body as its own control. So that's what I've done. Now, am I doing stuff that probably doesn't matter, that I'm wasting my money on, that doesn't work? Probably, but I'd rather do all the things that I know do the right things and see what happens. And it was sort of an experiment I did the last few years. I don't know how much I'll continue, but I'm going to see if I can get down to like 29, and then maybe I'll stop. but I think it's an important question, and it's like I was doing research projects at Cleveland Clinic around reversing Alzheimer's, and we were basically talking about designing a multi-interventional study. Now they've done these studies. They use multimodal interventions, which means you use a lot of different therapies to get the result. And they've done this called the finger trial, the pointer trial, where it's a comprehensive lifestyle intervention and exercise and diet and supplements and this and that, and treating all these different biomarkers. And it worked. But no Alzheimer's drug has ever worked, right? But this comprehensive lifestyle treatment not only worked to slow things down, but to reverse things, right? So we have to start thinking in this complexity theory, not just this reductionist model. And then when I presented this to the chief of research at Cleveland Clinic, she's like, no, you can't do all this. First, you just got to study vitamin D and dementia. Then you study exercise and dementia. Then you might study turmeric and dementia. Then you might study, whatever in dementia. And it's like, no, if you want a healthy human, you have to eat right, you have to exercise, you have to sleep, you have to deal with stress properly, you have to have a community, you have to have your nutrients optimized, you have to reduce your toxins. You can't just do one thing if you want to be a healthy human.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Hyman, for joining us. Dr. Hyman will be out signing his book out there for anybody who is interested, and it's also available for sale. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for coming, everybody.